Well, I am super excited to end the year, although I would have been excited at any point this year or any prior year to have as my guest one of my literary heroes. Peggy Noonan, everybody knows, was a journalist for CBS News in the 60s. Nope, 70s, I apologize. A speechwriter for Reagan in the 80s. Wrote What I Saw at the Revolution, which is a political and literary classic that had me for years convinced that I wanted to be a political or a presidential speechwriter. Didn't work out for me, but I'm happy to have you here. And then since 2000, a columnist for the Wall Street Journal that it's so many people love and was recognized with a Pulitzer Prize in 2016. Peggy, thanks for joining us. It's awesome to have you here.
Bruce, I love your stuff. You know, I read it every week and I send you comments. And felt very honored to be invited. And I thank you for bringing your community here.
It's a community as we were emailing about that has been excited to hear from governors and CEOs, and there's been nobody that has gotten a more, I think, enthusiastic reaction in emails. Some of it may be, and I'm way off what I wanted to talk about, but the nature of how you write and the fact that we read you, I think leads a lot of us to feel like you're our friend, even though you and I don't, it is presumptuous of me to have invited you, but I'm going to blame you. It's the way you
Oh,
write. I feel like we've been friends for years.
well, I think our emails make us feel like we've been friends for years too, and our admiration here. You know, thank you for saying that. Somebody said, I was thinking of this the other day. I'm going to think of who said it. It was Oscar Hammerstein. He said of his work that all writers don't know it, but they're giving themselves away. They're giving how they think and how they feel away. They think they're keeping themselves a little apart from their work. They're not. They're showing themselves totally in their work. And when I read that, I thought, oh my gosh, I think I feel that way also. I think that applies somewhat to me. And so after all these years, yes, I do think we all know each other. And I meet my readers on the road all the time. And I imagine how they read me and I feel like I know them.
Well, I got a
What do you
taste of
think?
that. I got a taste of that. Thanks for what you do on behalf of all of your fans who confuse ourselves with your friends. We're here partly because I wore Peggy Noonan down with enough invitations and emails that finally, when she came out with this book, which is a collection of columns over the last, it felt like at least 5 years, it may have been the last decade, called A
Yeah.
Certain Idea of America, that, when you get on a book tour, you understand that email friends are going to harass you until you say yes. And so I'm pleased that I succeeded. It's a great book. It reminded me of so many essays I loved. I'll be honest, I listened to it on Audible, and I was skeptical, but the person you had doing the reading was wonderful. Did a great job. And so I commend it to those who like me like Audible. But two things about that. One, as always, for attendees, we'll send you a link. We got copies for everybody who showed up live, and you'll have to enter your email and it'll get sent to you. But I want to start with Peggy, the title, A Certain Idea of America. Why that title, and what is the idea that you wouldn't have named it that if you didn't have a sense of what you think that certain idea is?
That title came pretty quickly. I was meeting with a publisher who said, let's do a collection of the past few years. And I said, that's a good idea. And then we just started daydreaming about what we would call it. And about within an hour, I had remembered that Charles de Gaulle had written his war memoirs and very famously begun his memoirs of his time during and just after the war, World War II. He had begun with the famous sentence, and it was kind of mystical, but it was, Charles de Gaulle, that sort of mythic figure, began his book with the words, all of my life, I've had a certain idea of France. And it came into my mind because I thought when I had read it years before, do you know what? I feel the same way that I've had a certain idea of America, that it exists in my mind and that it's part of what drives my efforts to write. And it is a simple idea. It is in part a matter of rational thought and in part a matter of human sentiment. And it is simply the idea that America is a great place, that it deserves our feelings of protectiveness as we take it each generation and try to shine it up a little bit and hand it on to the next generation and tell them, shine it up a little bit and pass it on safely. That it has been something epical in history, that it was something new in history, that it was founded on the most extraordinary ideas. All men are created equal. And so I think I want to say as I get older, I feel this more tenderly, but I think I've always just felt it with a sort of tender sense, maybe in part because I came from Irish immigrants who thought they put all their chips on America and it worked out, and they felt protective of it.
Well, that sense comes through for sure. As we were emailing in advance of this, I told you I feel like when I read you, and especially this collection presented that way, it's sort of what a Norman Rockwell painting or a Frank Capra movie would feel like if they were a column. Although then I suggested that that felt a bit sentimental, which maybe that's just me and how I read it. But your love of the country certainly comes through, even though a lot of this is journalism that's sometimes unkind to those who deserve it or hard hitting.
Thank you for putting it that way. Um, hmm. Well, I'll tell you, Frank Capra had great particularity in his work. He was, I think, trying to show a true picture, but one that was inescapably affectionate and inescapably moved. Um, and so that is a very great compliment.
Well, intended as such. So before I get into some of the political figures and the current events that you always write about and continue to do so, um, you do not strike me as someone for whom there's anything that is certainly in a book accidental. You open with Billy Graham. And I suspect you could open with a lot. I tend to think the protected, unprotected is still one of the most extraordinarily thoughtful analyses. The Pulitzer Committee thought so too. But you didn't open with that. You opened with Billy Graham. And I'm interested in, as you were thinking through the plan, why you decided that was story one, chapter one in this book.
It was chapter one. The reason I began with Billy Graham, I'm not completely sure of, except every time I read it over, um, I loved its feeling of sweetness. I don't mean sentimentality and I don't mean too sweet, but there was a healthy appreciation for this sterling and impressive individual. Also, as I was working on the column about Billy Graham, I remember having a wonderful interview with Laura Hildebrand,
Yeah.
the woman who had written the great book about Louis Zamperini.
Unbroken.
Yeah, I think she wrote Seabiscuit, didn't she?
She did.
Yeah, and she's so fabulous. And she had written Louis Zamperini of World War II fame, had had an experience watching a Billy Graham crusade. And Laura just explained it so beautifully. So I tracked down her phone number and I cold called her. And I said, tell me about this. And it's very funny. She's a wonderful writer. She writes a lot. She writes big books. But I had to remind her of this little section about Billy Graham. And then it all came back to her. And she said, oh my God, yes, Billy Graham saved Louis's life. And we had such a wonderful, mutually appreciative writer to writer conversation that I'll never forget. Anyway, as I read over the Billy Graham column, I thought of that conversation and the warmth it elicited in me. And I just thought, begin this book with appreciation. It's a chapter, it's the beginning of the book. It's called Let Us Now Praise Famous Men. And it's about these extraordinary creatures that America has yielded up over the years, from Tom Wolfe, Billy Graham, oh my
Margaret
God,
Chase Smith.
Margaret Chase Smith of the state of Maine,
Yeah.
right? the only woman Republican senator in the 1950s, and the only one who somehow found the temerity to stand up to Joe McCarthy. And she was, as I researched her, what a marvelous person, what a good public servant, which was exactly how she thought of herself. So I wanted to say I wanted to begin the book positive isn't quite it. It was almost like, oh, let's remember why we love life. You know, I
Uh,
think we'd all been feeling a little bit down the past few years.
I feel like
And
also Graham is a bit of an American original. Like,
yeah,
and it felt on brand for the nature of the book that it took this weird alchemy or stew of all of these things that make America America, to then go to the Louis Zamperini being saved by Billy Graham felt a really good entree into helping see your certain idea of America. So I like that. Um,
good.
two of the essays in here, at least, are specific to the current president, outgoing President Joe Biden, and you do lots of thinking and wonderful writing about so many of these folks. And one thing that I wonder about is how history is going to see Joe Biden. He's been a public servant for 50 years. We know presidents' approvals tend to go up once they're out of the public eye. And the question is, how's history going to judge him? Is he going to be the hero who came in amidst the pandemic, did more industrial policy than anybody, arguably, since FDR, although you could argue that, but did a lot? Is he a hack? Is he a tragic, a Greek tragic hero? I'm interested. It's early, but you've observed presidents going way back, or I should say, you have observed presidents, including
Yeah,
presidents like Lincoln and others.
yeah.
I'm interested. What do you think? How's history gonna write about him?
Well, he doesn't look good right now, does he? I mean, I think he's not. I think Mark Halperin's morning meeting show on Zoom, I was listening to this morning, and Mark noted that the president is going off to Delaware for, I guess, Christmas time off. I think he said today, meaning not much work is going on. There is a sense I get the sense, I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel like Joe Biden got mad at America and mad at the Democratic Party. And he's thinking, I had a bad debate and you all turned on me. I had a bad debate and my party left me. Well, I deserve better than that, and I don't like you very much at the moment. So that is sort of what I pick up from him, I think. How will history remember him? He was the president who followed Donald Trump, and then I think in part the president who ushered in Donald Trump. I think he would be remembered in a more vivid and positive way if he had kept in his head the thought that I thought he walked into his presidency with, and that was the thought, I am getting older and I can feel the weight of age and I can feel how it sands you down. And I'm a little tired even walking in, but I got a lot I'm going to do. But I'm going to make this one term, and I'm going to make it one term that shines. And then about 18 months before the term ends, I'm going to tell my party and the country, off now. You must choose someone else. Have a hellacious battle. I will not take sides. I'm not going to say you have to choose my vice president or this impressive governor. Go do it. Pick somebody great, beat those Republicans, and get my second term for me. That's what I think he should have done.
I share that sense that that would have been a pretty epic dropping of the microphone, and history would have been kinder than it will be because the final chapter will unfortunately balance out in negative ways some of the terrific earlier chapters. So you wrote a lot during, before, after now the 2024 election, and one of the themes that you've been observing for the last 4 years, it's throughout the book, is sort of the rise of and subsequent reaction to the left, the sort of the woke left. And part of what we saw in 2024 was a cultural backlash, a woke lash. But you also have written about the unprotected, which is far more of a populist story, far more of an economic story, the story of the people who feel like, neither the university elites nor the business elites gathering in Davos see them
Yeah.
and take them into account. And it seems to me that they're different large waves. And I'm interested, when you think of 2024, do you think one of the waves more than the other predominated, or was the outcome two giant waves both crashing into each other at the same time?
Oh, maybe a bunch of stuff crashed. I'll tell you one of the proudest moments of my professional life. You mentioned the column, The Protected and the Unprotected, which I wrote, I think, in 2015. I'm not sure. And it was about how in
16.
America, 2016,
Yeah. Yes.
um, and it was about how in America there are people who make the law and report the law and are on TV and produce all our media and are in legislatures, and they're kind of on top, and they are the protected class. They make the law. Everybody else, unprotected, not establishment, not able to live yet in affluent neighborhoods or have their kids go to affluent schools. They are unprotected and have to live in this edifice created by others. And I just thought, in a way, that's always true, but also in a way, it had become a real two different camps in America. Anyway, I can tell this. I went to one of those great off the record gatherings, Bilderberg,
Yeah.
um, where I went just as an observer and just as a member and hearing everybody. And it's very educational, full of extremely smart people, full of attainment. And they asked me last minute to speak on something. And I thought, well, why don't you just summon your guts and tell them about the protected and the unprotected? And I did an entire speech about that to people who did not necessarily want to hear it. And it was just I know I'm bragging, this is in very poor taste, but it was a fabulous moment. And one delegate of the EU, a very high standing person, walked out with a feeling of great impatience. And it was just a great moment, Bruce. I really, oh my God, I enjoyed it and felt I had spoken truth to power.
Second
Truth to
only,
power that didn't want to hear.
second only to your Al Smith dinner, I then presume, in your favorite moments.
Oh yeah, well that one was straight from the heart about my great aunt. But anyway, you asked about woke. Look, one of the things about the election of Donald Trump in this cycle, in 2016, a lot of people didn't know what they were electing. They knew they were throwing the long ball. This time they had a sense they were throwing the long ball, but they knew exactly who was going to catch it and how they were going to run and what they were going to do. So it feels very different. But certainly, I feel like people have felt beleaguered by what I guess we've called political correctness for about 20 years. And we've been calling woke for, I guess, about 7 or 8 years. And they felt there was no way to turn it around or no way that the people who don't like it could somehow come together and push back. And I think they found in Donald Trump the means by which they could come together and push back. So I think this was really an epical election. I think I'm misusing the word epical, but let's make believe I'm not.
As a rule, nobody, no, I don't think Strunk or White are on this, and we're going to defer to your use of language. You mentioned 2024, and you are the first person to have talked about the Republican establishment, of which I suspect I am very much a part, going through the five stages of grief. You're right. Nobody thought he was going to win the nomination. Nobody thought he was going to win the general election, and nobody would have thought, especially after January 6th, he was going to come back and win the popular vote.
Yeah.
um, you say America knows who they're throwing to and has a far greater sense of what to expect. What do you expect from a Trump 2.0 term, where he's coming in? I'm hoping my next quarterly slide deck will be a big look at the many ways in which the world has changed economically, geopolitically, domestic politics. What are your expectations for Trump 2.0?
I never know quite what to expect, but I think we can probably take him at his word in the past few weeks and months that he means to move quickly on energy and get that, what does he call it, that black gold out of the ground. And he feels energy is something to move on. Obviously, illegal immigration, I assume, trying to extend the tax cuts that he had originally brought into place. You don't get to do that many big things. It's huge thing. You can't do 10 big things in your first years, but I assume he will go forward on those things. And of course, first he has to get through the cabinet, what are sure to be sparky cabinet hearings, which will probably, I don't know, you never know if things like that are going to take more energy out of him and his apparatus than you think necessary, or if they'll think, no, that's just more fire. Yay, fire. So we'll see.
Yeah, I've always had a Godzilla theory where, in the movie To Kill the Beast, they hit him. Oh, they can't kill Godzilla, so they use a nuclear weapon, and instead of destroying Godzilla, it makes him stronger. Normally, a president who
Yeah.
proposes a nominee like a Matt Gaetz, who didn't even make it, or someone else, is weakened, and yet one gets the impression that President Trump, with a nominee like Gates, gets stronger because he goes to the Republicans on the Hill and he says, "All right, you got to be heard on this one or two. Now you owe me the rest." It's you were obviously in the White House when President Reagan got shot. Now, obviously, anybody getting shot is pretty traumatic and extraordinary. Reagan, of course, was near death and had, multiple operations and such. But things that I feel like I've read leave the impression that President Reagan was very much of a changed man, and you could see it and feel it in his governance, and maybe you would in his presence post getting shot. And I'm interested in how you saw that and whether in these early innings you're perceiving a changed Donald Trump from his near-death experience.
Oh my gosh, there's a lot there. I was talking to a big, very big Trump loyalist and former staffer who, oh, I think he'll be a staffer again pretty soon. And he, and we have a lovely relationship in which we both know he is spinning me and I am playing the part of the clever reporter who knows she's being spun. But he's an honest fella. And he really felt that Donald Trump had been changed, that it's just gonna change you. First of all, if you're gesturing at a podium outdoors and a bullet comes within an inch or two of your brain. Second of all, he had not been there in Butler, Pennsylvania, but he'd been there at the golf club when Trump came in from the Secret Service, making him scurry off the golf course because they'd found a little assassin's den ready to take him out. And Trump was surprised. Third of all, I take very seriously the persistent reports that Iran was trying to kill him throughout the campaign. So would these things change anybody? Yes. Would they change even a man in his late 70s of fairly brittle worldview? I think yes, but more to the point, his loyalist and former staffer did. I think did you see the news conference yesterday, Trump's news conference?
I read about it, but I didn't watch it.
Bruce, it was interesting. I watched it beginning to end, and he seemed what my loyalist and staffer had described as more confident, more calm. Everybody who knows him mentions the word calm. So more confident, more calm. He absolutely thinks that his life was spared. He also feels that this was not an election, but a vindication. He feels very strongly that the entire massive mainstream American media was against him, has always been against him, but certainly was directing America, don't reelect him. And he felt they looked at the media, looked at him and thought, no, I'm going to go with him. So he felt very much vindicated. And in that news conference yesterday, he just this may be only a passing mood, but he was certainly not only calm with the press, but rather patient with the press. As in when they said, oh, by the way, are you going to move on Iran? Are you going to militarily attack Iran? And he said, oh, that's a great question, but why would I give you that answer? Which was just common sense
Right.
as a reply. But anyway, we'll see. But it was impressive.
One of the pieces you wrote, and it's in the book, was imagine a sane Donald Trump. It almost makes you wonder
Yeah.
whether it's like the variation on the old famous Churchill line in victory, magnanimity, and defeat, defiance. Trump seems a lot better when he's winning and he's on top. He seems calm and it's when it seems like things aren't going his way that the least predictable things come up. But you talked about the press conference, and there is nobody who is more of an expert on presidents and the language that they use that I know of than you. I'd said that after reading your book, wanted to be a presidential speechwriter, but part of it, not only was it a great book, but part of it is, to me, I'm so moved by the people whose soaring prose can change, can unite and can unify, and whether it's we have nothing to fear but fear itself, or if the British Empire's last 1,000 days, this was their finest hour, or I have a dream, or these are the boys of Pointe de Hoc. These are the men who. Sorry, I forgot the rest of the quote, but I know you know it. Uh, so I'm interested in your take on Donald Trump because he is not typically gone for that same kind of soaring prose, the Kennedy, the FDR. He communicates in a very different way, but he's effective and he's got his adherents. And I'm interested in whether your sense of how presidents use language has changed observing Donald Trump, and whether you think it's because he's an innovator or because the 21st century is a new era. Big
Oh,
question. Sorry.
yeah, maybe a bunch of the above. Certainly he's a different guy. I mean, I see him as the avatar of the post-heroic presidency. I think up to a certain point in American life, the American people expected their president to be a personal exemplar, if that's the word, a wholly admirable human being, the kind of person who you'd say to the kids, I would like you to be like that man someday. Whether it's not a political question, whether it's Jimmy Carter, with his personal rectitude, or Ronald Reagan or George H.W. Bush with their virtues. Look, Trump is a break with all that. He is a break with that past. And the way in which he expresses himself is a break with all that. There was, I ask you to forgive me. I think I'm going to cough a little here. um, in 2015, when Trump first announced, a number of lucky things happened to me that day, like my sister from Georgia called me and told me how much she loved him. And my uncle, who'd been a Marine out in Long Island, called me and said, how do you like my guy? So immediately I knew, I'd watched it live, but immediately I knew this is important. Something's happening here. But the way he spoke that day when he announced, when he described illegal immigrants from Mexico, I don't remember at this second the exact words, but they're criminals, they're horrible, they're rapists, and some of them I'm sure are nice people. It was one of those Trumpian constructions.
Yes.
And I thought, you can't talk like that. That's not nice. That's not how presidents who are measured and who are careful and kindly talk. So I thought, oh, very bad. I got to tell you, my sister and my uncle thought, oh, very good. You know why? Because they understood exactly what he was saying, why he was saying it. They agreed with him, but also they knew he couldn't walk it back. You cannot talk like that. We're going to get these guys out. We're going to put up a wall, and they're not going to come in anymore. I'm going to make sure it's going to be a wonderful wall. It's going to be huge. Mexico's going to pay for it. You can't talk like that, Bruce. And then 2 months later, you're elected and you go, well, I've been rethinking it. And I think I was not kind. I've changed my mind. So it meant the fact that they appreciated, my sister and my uncle appreciated the fact that they were getting it straight from Trump and he wouldn't be changing his mind and that was what he was going to do. That made it everything for them. They were Americans who didn't want to hear more eloquence. They wanted straight shooting, blunt talking. This is what I'm going to do, and I mean it, and I'm going to come through. So, so that too is a break. So Trump characterologically and the way he expresses himself and puts himself forward in public, it's all a break with the past.
Seems to be a break with the establishment too. You've written, I wonder if you perceive, it seems like you perceive that the establishment has lost the plot. And this
Oh,
goes a little bit to your protected, unprotected. You're right about universities, you're right about the media, you write one called Psychos in the C-Suites, though that was a little bit about Theranos. But the loss of the confidence in the public, you write well about that. And it seems like that does give rise to populists. I don't know if you have read the book by Martin Gurry. He came out in 2014 called The Revolt of the Public and the Crisis of Authority. If not, I know what thank you gift I'm going to send to you for making the time with us because he's a former CIA analyst and it's a brilliant analysis. But I'm interested in your take on where the establishment finds itself, where the people who are protected, the people who could work from home, the people who, don't worry that trade deals will undermine them. Where are they today amidst Trump's coming back? Macron's government fell, the German government fell. It really does feel like this populist movement is global and rising, not subsiding.
How does the establishment feel now? I'm not convinced the establishment fully understands it's kind of lost in this battle. I've been on a book tour, as you know. I've been running around for about 6, 7 weeks. And it's funny, most of cable news, I mean, the green room setup and behind the scenes, it seems a little more run down. Which would have to do with a lot of things. But I kept wondering, do they understand something powerful has shifted and they were not on the winning side? I'm not sure of that. Surely some know, but I'm not sure. Some of the establishment people of the wars, the anti-establishment wars of the past 15 years or so are simply getting older. Some are calling their friends in the Trump administration and saying, I have a great deal of experience. I wonder if you could recommend me to the comms department. Some are retiring, but there's a lot of shifting going on, I think, in the American establishment. Silicon Valley establishment very quickly decided what's going on and went to Mar-a-Lago. So interesting.
Very interesting indeed. So here's a question, and I have my own baked in belief. Is Peggy Noonan an optimist? I tend to think very much so. After your wonderful Certain Idea, I turned to Steven Pinker's book from 2019 called Enlightenment Now, which I really enjoyed. It's optimism on steroids, about how doomers often dominate because media is looking for clicks and for eyeballs, but the data suggest a much better future and a healthier direction. And I feel like my idea of America is, it ain't always pretty, but the Obama line, the arc of history bends towards justice. We are increasingly more diverse, more inclusive, stronger. I wouldn't want to be anything other than American and alive at any time other than today. And all I might wish is to, be a little bit younger than I am, which shows my own optimism in the future. I read optimism, and then your last section, we can handle it. The last two sections are which America's institutions are frailer than we know, and the century of the post-historic presidency. And so I'm like, well, I think she's an optimist, but that's an interesting way to end.
Yeah. Um, I'm never quite sure of the answer to that question. I love life and I enjoy it. I love America and I enjoy it. I just had my first grandchild. I
Hey,
enjoy him, this great little baby. with these big swimming infant eyes, those big dark pools. Um, uh, it's hard to be as full of enjoyment as I am and still think the gloomy Irish thoughts, I think. Um, uh, oh gosh, I don't know what the answer is. I feel faith and I feel hope. I'm not sure I feel optimism, but I think comparing us to Europe and saying we're in better shape, I'm with that. Then again, for some reason, there are drones flying over New Jersey. And no one will tell us where they're from or what they are. And they expect us to go, oh, okay. It's a scene from a Steven Spielberg movie, drones over New Jersey. Fine, I'm happy with that. You
Well, you're
know,
the master of language, but I don't see how you could have faith and hope and that doesn't somehow equal optimism. It seems to me those are the constituent elements of optimism, but maybe I'm wrong.
I
Um,
think optimism is thinking that the best thing will happen or things will definitely, just by the nature of things, turn out well. I'm not sure that's so. The man I worked for, Ronald Reagan, was called the great optimist. I'm not sure he was that optimistic, but I thought he had a lot of faith and hope too.
Fair points. Um, besides making sure that public figures are not in shorts and hoodies, and I would note I put on my jacket. Um, what would you do to improve American society? Whether the return of manners, you've uh, so much of your writing, it seems to me, so much of what you do is you hold the society and public figures up to an expectation of dignity, of grace. It's sort of why Ronald Reagan famously always wore his jacket in the Oval Office. The office demands a respect that you show it, and I feel like my reading of you is the nation deserves a respect. What would you do to try to bend some of these curves that seem to have, I'd say, younger generations, but that's not fair. It's all generations showing more respect and appreciation for the country? Are they policy changes? Who's at the tip of the spear that could engender the sort of changes that we need?
Well, let me take it from a shallow point of view, which is just how things look and how things sound. There are a lot of, I have always felt that America has had some special troubles with families. It's funny, we think of ourselves as 1950s families, everything's beautiful and fabulous in suburban America. But, Americans all came from somewhere else and kept pushing west. And there was a lot of leaving the past behind, leaving family behind, having irregular families. This is a long way of saying America is frequently an unparented country.
Hmm.
Number one. Number two, that means kids have to look around them for models on how to act and how to talk and how to be and how to present yourself. That says to me that it is optimal and is best in our public figures when they dress in a way that is handsome and appropriate and speak in the same way and show, to the extent manners or morals, show kindliness and thoughtfulness and not intemperateness and rudeness and pushing people around. I always think the important thing is remembering that our kids need people on whom to model behavior. There was something Obama did that I never, I kind of appreciated it at the time, but it didn't seem to me as big during his presidency as it did by the end of his presidency. Now, Obama presented himself, very well with a beyond dignity. He was elegant, but he did a thing that I think modeled something for kids that was really wonderful. And it was that he had an extended family that was important to him and they lived with him. And it was said at night, he often broke away from official duties and had dinner with the family and talked to the girls about how's school going. They had Michelle's mother living with them. They were three generations of humans in that big house. and they were working together as a functioning, loving unit. Man, I got to tell you, for 8 years, I think that sent a message to kids, to young people, to people looking around a little bit lost and thinking how to do it. How do you do life? You know, we forget most people don't know how to do life. And if nobody's telling them good stuff, they're going to take on bad stuff. So that's a windy answer to a thoughtful question, but I think about that a lot. And I wish members of our culture, you know, our biggest stars, the biggest people in music, the biggest people in movies had a sense of what I'm talking about. They probably, you know, don't want to take themselves that seriously, which is nice. I mean, it's good when people don't, but in a way they ought to take themselves more seriously. They're teaching the kids how to be grown-up humans.
Look, it's they use the word influencer for a reason.
Yeah,
Um,
that's right.
so last two questions. First, going full history nerd on you. It's something I wonder, two of the great presidents of all time, your old boss, President Reagan, Abraham Lincoln, could they succeed in the 21st century? How much of this is ultimately character and how much of this is fit for the time and the place? And obviously, there's no way to know this. It's as somebody who has studied presidencies and who is a keen current affairs observer, we drop Honest Abe in this thing. Is he toast on Twitter or does he find a way? And equally, at least President Reagan, who was television era, and you understand, does he lose the civility and roll with the punches, or does he class the whole joint up? Were he around right now?
I think the American people would probably love it if in the future the candidates classed the whole joint up again. They'd like that. They'd like that because they're normal. People like that. Um, I can't help but feel that Donald Trump and a generation of political figures like him came from extremity. They came from the fact that our politics seemed extreme. They came from the fact that our culture seemed extreme. And that, like, all this weird, horrible, woke stuff was being squished down on people's heads. That the country sort of lost the sense that it had the right to have a border. You know, you're not a nation without a border. A nation is a certain size. And one nation next to another, this is nation A, this is nation B. When you lose a sense of that, things become confused and they become outlandish. And our politics and culture have become confused and outlandish. If things could settle down in those areas, I think the American people would love to see the return of a certain kind of elegance and dignity and being able to tell the kids, I want you to be just like him or her.
Last question. Everybody on this Zoom reads Peggy Noonan. Who does Peggy Noonan read? Who do you look like? I'm looking forward, as I told you, every Saturday morning. The best thing is to get the journal, and I'm going straight to you as the first thing I want to look at on Saturday morning. I know it comes out Friday. Halperin quotes you on his stuff on Friday, but other than his excerpts of you, I wait to treat myself. Who do you look forward to each week? Who do you enjoy?
Um, One of the people I enjoy most is John Ellis and his newsletter.
Mhm.
You know, his morning newsletter is just full. It's so full of information, and John's judgment is so thoughtful about what is included and what is not. I try to read all the columnists. I know a lot of them. I just want to know, what are they thinking? You know, what are they up to? Some have a special place for me. I love Bret Stephens. I mean, I love him as a person. And so I always read Bret, Rouse Douthat at the Times, everybody at the Journal. I just want to know what they're all thinking of. Um, my only pet peeve these days about journalism, it's not my only pet peeve, I could give you 28 of them, but my biggest pet peeve about journalism these days does not have to do with opinion, but has to do with the news page, the news hole, page one. Guys, I feel like the world is exploding with news. just waiting to be there. What's it like in our nuclear storage facilities? Is anything leaking? What's really going on with crime? What's going on really inside the administration plans? What are they? I find less and less reporting, first class, incisive, tough reporting, and more, just frivolous, frivolous stuff like the best five streamers on Amazon today and cultural stuff that somebody has decided is extremely important. Leaking nuclear facilities is extremely important. I'm tired of headlines that say how to think about what's happening in Angola. I'll decide how to think about it. You tell me the facts about what's happening in Angola. Do you know what I mean? I think if newspaper readership is going down at some newspapers, it may have to do with the fact that they are forgetting to report the news.
I think that's it's a great observation to end on. Although when I send you this book, I'll be interested whether you continue to believe that they could, or whether the news industry, as it was running into the printing press of its day, the internet, has them a C, because maybe people aren't reading and wouldn't read other than well-educated people. But we're going to leave it there because you've been incredibly generous with your time. You're on a book tour. You didn't have to spend your time with me, and I'm really grateful that you did. All of us are grateful. For everybody, I'm hoping that the fulfillment guys get this to you in time for Christmas, because it's a great, you got to
Oh,
read it yourself, but if you can not dog ear the pages, it's a great Christmas gift to put into the stocking. Peggy, thank you so much.
thank you, Bruce. It was not just an honor, but a delight. It was wonderful. I hope we can do this again. And thank you, everybody, for showing up. Thank you so much.
Happy holidays, all.
You too.